Welcome to another episode of Hazardous Area Safety, the Hazardous Area Safety Podcast. Today I have a very special guest, someone who's an ambassador of hydrogen and also one of the driving forces of hydrogen, particularly in the oceanic region. So today I'd like to introduce Furat Dawood into the studio for an enlightening conversation. Thank you for taking the time, and would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Travis, for the opportunity to spread out the word about hydrogen. I'm Dr. Furat Dawood. I have a diverse background, so bachelor degree in electronic engineering, then master in telecommunications, microwaves. Then I completed a graduate diploma in energy and carbon studies. And that led me to realize the role of hydrogen in our economy and specifically for energy. Hydrogen was used around the world for many, many years, and the market probably around 90 million tons every year. But most of it, all of it, until a few years ago, was used as a raw material, chemical element in the refineries and to produce ammonia and then fertilizers. So in my PhD, I looked at the possibilities and the role of this element to support the energy systems and specifically the renewable energy systems. We know that most of the renewable energy systems, they suffer from the intermittency and variability. So what role of those batteries and storage systems, and one of them is hydrogen, can stabilize and enhance the integration of the renewable energy systems into our existing energy systems. Thank you.
So this is the first time that we've had someone on the show that migrated from an electrical perspective into hydrogen, because typically the guests that we have on go from process safety or they're a chemical engineer, and then they start dipping their hands into hydrogen as far as renewable. So from that perspective, you would have a very good understanding of not only the potential of it as a fuel substance, but also understand the safety parameters around it as well. Do you find that has enabled you to help you within your studies, within your research, within the grants that you acquire and the findings that you acquire from those particular grants? Because that's a very unique perspective.
You're right here. When it comes to hydrogen is a chemical element. But when you deal with hydrogen, you need kind of diverse type of engineering. So it's not just chemical engineering. Requires a good knowledge in thermodynamics and mechanical engineering. When it comes to regenerating power, then you need some knowledge and background in electrical engineering, and so on. So hydrogen engineering is kind of a wide range of different types of engineering. And with my diverse background, I was really enjoying the journey through the PhD, discovering a lot of things that I was not aware about, and connecting my backgrounds in all these different aspects and different engineerings all together towards hydrogen was really very helpful. So when it comes to safety, it's not just related to the chemical element itself. It's related to the thermodynamics of using hydrogen, the mechanical aspect of using hydrogen, piping, process engineering, and so on. So that's why we are even trying to create a new area of practice as a hydrogen engineering. And why is that? Because it's not a very specific one type of engineering. It's kind of an umbrella. And under that umbrella, it's all that diverse of, we are talking here engineering, but there's a lot of other aspects also. And it's not just technical, economic side, it's very important. And different types of applications also, which gonna lead to a different fields of research, fields of um, manufacturing, and so on. So I find it's a new type of approach. Everyone knows hydrogen for a very long time, and most of the technologies they are actually been discovered or implemented long time ago, more than 100 years, at least. Now, how you advance those technologies, enhance them to become more viable, more cost-effective, so can be implemented. That's my point of view around the hydrogen for energy. I'm talking here about hydrogen for energy because hydrogen as an industrial raw material, chemical element, that was going on for a very long time. Yep.
That was actually going to be probably one of the first questions, talking about what actually is hydrogen energy, because you've been at many conferences where speakers get up and say it's a hydrogen focused conference. They will talk about the chemical properties of hydrogen, but pushed to describe what hydrogen energy is and what do we define that as and how does that work towards a clean fuel source. People can't provide a straight answer for it. So what would you classify hydrogen energy as, and where do you see it fit in as a clean fuel source?
Very good question. And you're right. Depends how you answer the question, then the people will receive it, of course, in a different ways, but we have to focus on fundamentals. So most of the elements in our universe, over 70% is hydrogen actually. And the rest of it is, most of it helium then, which comes from the hydrogen. And what's left, it's all other materials. So that's first of all. Hydrogen can be used as a fuel, and whatever you do with the hydrogen, burn it or do any reaction, will be oxidized and become water. So there's no emissions at all. And that's why we start looking at the hydrogen. But why not before? It all depends on before we were using fossil fuel and they were cheap, and there was not that much awareness about the global warming, and I'm talking like after the industrial revolution and until probably few decades. Then once we realize we are hurting our planet, then we start looking for some clean sources of energy. And renewable energy is obvious solution, solar, wind, oceanic, hydropower, pumped hydropower, and the rest of it. The issue with some of them, like the solar and wind, oceanic, they are variable and intermittent. And that's why we start thinking about how to store that clean energy. So many different types of storage systems, like batteries, even mechanical, flywheels, electrical, like superconducting, many other. Even we sometimes store the energy in a form of heat. The more we start thinking about storage, the more challenges start showing up. So, for example, batteries can store the energy, and they are doing very well and very quick in response, and they very efficient, some of them over 95%. But they can't hold the charge there for a long time. So you have to keep top up. And as you know, the renewable energy, they are not always available, and sometimes there's some good seasons and some we don't say bad, but less productive seasons. So we want to, we start thinking how we can store that energy for a long time, seasonally. For example, pumped hydro, it's good, but then you start losing the water through evaporation and penetration through the ground. So after 2, 3, 4 months, you lose that water. It's good if you use it on a daily basis. Perfect. It's like the batteries, perfect. But then how are we going to store it for 6 months or a year? So with all these challenges, we start thinking about hydrogen, because we can convert any type of energy into hydrogen gas. Now, what is hydrogen? Hydrogen is a gas, the most abundant in the universe and or even on Earth. It's kind of the first element in the periodic table, and colorless, odorless, non-toxic, but it's very flammable. And to deal with this, you need to really focus on the safety side of using it. Now, back to the main point, we can convert any energy and apply that energy to any compound, a material containing hydrogen, which is all the organic materials, or even fossil fuels. They are hydrogen and carbon based, and water, which is, 75% of our planet is covered by water. So water is H2O. So hydrogen is available. We need to apply that energy in the presence of a catalyst to split the hydrogen from the materials. So and that's very important to focus on that. We call it the method or the technology to produce the hydrogen. Because, as I said, hydrogen, whatever you do with it, the byproduct is water. So zero emissions, very clean energy. But as hydrogen, probably I didn't mention that, but hydrogen is an energy carrier. It's not an energy source unless you find it in its pure form in nature, which is possible, comes from most of the fossil fuel fields, oil and gas, and sometimes comes with the helium from underground. That's still very early days for these technologies to explore and find the natural hydrogen. So let us exclude that at the moment and focus on how we make hydrogen. So once we put some energy, that energy will be stored in the hydrogen. And so it's not an energy source, it's an energy carrier or a storage medium. And each kilogram of hydrogen can store between 33 to 39 kilowatt hour of energy. So once we produce it, we put that energy in the hydrogen. Then hydrogen is very easy to be integrated into the existing energy systems, because you generate electricity, then that electricity easy to integrate. Though producing hydrogen, store hydrogen, how you regenerate, that's not a very straightforward. Also, hydrogen is storable, transportable, with all the challenges, but doesn't need instantaneous balance. Like if you produce electricity, you have to use it. It's suitable for grid or off-grid renewable energy storage systems. And as I said, it's zero emissions, whatever you do with it. Also can be used as a direct fuel in its pure form, or making different types of other fuels, synthetic fuels. And we'll talk about this probably later on. There's possibility for large capacity of storage. And in the batteries, you can't use all the charge. We always leave what we call a depth of discharge, 10%, 15%, depends on the type of the battery. But theoretically, if you have hydrogen in a tank, you can use it, all of it, and refill the tank. So that's the main long discharge duration is the main reason why we start consider hydrogen as an energy storage.
So it's more about having the applicable technology and understand, because what you've just described provides the insight that it shouldn't only be seen as a direct fuel source in its pure form. It should also be looked at as a storage system to assist with the clean energy umbrella. So with knowing, how do you see this? Because we were, say 3 years ago, when hydrogen was seen as a miracle cure for over-consumerism and more about, we're going to see hydrogen applications within Australia, New Zealand. We're going to see an access to abundance of infrastructure to allow for fuel cell technology, even conversion to hydrogen internal combustion engines. Is it a safe energy source for your home, for your car, for heavy transport? And how do you see, like, obviously we'll talk about the net zero and decarbonisation plans, but if we talk about it as a purely retail product at this point in time in the conversation, how would you envisage things in the future, say 5 years from now? What would you see a typical family would be able to go and purchase something, or they would have a hydrogen generator or a hydrogen storage system within their household? How do you see it in the larger context of what's available for a residential consumer?
That's a wide question, but very good question. And probably I'll split that to two things, two different questions. So the first one is the safety aspects, and the second one is where we're going to see hydrogen play a role in our energy systems in the next 5 years or 10 years, or to achieve net zero emissions. So I'll start with the second question. Hydrogen, if we find it naturally, or we produce it and store it, this is kind of a game changer. So we're going to be able to use it in so many different ways, as a direct fuel, make different types of fuels like synthetic fuels, make different products like the ammonia, fertilizers, and so on. So it's not just as a fuel in its very pure form, like hydrogen by itself. We can use it and combine it with so many different things to produce different materials. That's the first thing. The second thing is very important. As I mentioned, whatever we do with the hydrogen, gonna be zero emissions. Because it's an energy carrier. So it's gonna carry the energy input, or the type of energy we start with. So how clean is that hydrogen going to be determined by how we produce it. So most of the hydrogen, 95 or over percent, in the last 50, 60, 80 years, was produced from the fossil fuel. So from coal, from gas, and because it's so mature and the feed and stock so cheap, so it's valuable, and they've been using it for a very long time. But that's not clean energy. It comes from, and that's why there's what we call it a color coding. So if it comes from the coal, we call it brown or even black hydrogen. If it comes from the natural gas, we call it gray hydrogen. If it comes from renewable energy, we call it green hydrogen. So it's not just hydrogen as it is, it depends how we produce it, which is very important. And that's why when we start focusing on using hydrogen as a clean energy, then green hydrogen is the main topic now. It's how to produce green hydrogen. That means from renewable energy. Of course, there's something in between, which is when you produce it from fossil fuel and capture the carbon emissions. We call this type of technology blue hydrogen, which is kind of clean. If you don't include the emissions comes with the feedstock itself. When you get the natural gas from underground, how much emissions was associated. If you neglect that one, then this type of technology is clean energy also, because you capture the carbon. And before we were always thinking to store the carbon somewhere underground or under the ocean. Now we are talking about utilizing that carbon. So, two good products, but the feedstock is the problem. If it's from natural gas or something else. So we focus these days around the world and in Australia, New Zealand, Oceania, on green hydrogen. And we are well positioned in Australia. We have a lot of land and very good sunshine and some good wind resources, some good oceanic type of resources, energy resources. So we can produce a lot of hydrogen. And that's why we start talking or thinking about exporting hydrogen. And it's pure form. And that comes with a challenge always. Those challenges mainly is how to store it in a safe and economically viable way, and how you transport it in a safe and economically viable way. And there's a lot of R&Ds, research and development activities, specifically in Australia, around the world, but in Australia we are doing well, and hundreds of projects looking at these possibilities. And the market is there. Probably the main barrier is now it's green hydrogen is more expensive than gray hydrogen.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about those incentives and how we can move on. Now back to the safety. Hydrogen, like all other fuels, comes with kind of a degree of danger. It's flammable. We are just used to using the petrol, gasoline, and LPG, but also they are, most of them, all of them, probably as dangerous as hydrogen. Now, why people think hydrogen is more dangerous? Because of that old picture of Hindenburg. And some of the recipients, they don't need to take that big risk. Though what happened in Hindenburg and even the two incidents after that, the main cause was not the hydrogen, but the hydrogen, the existence of the hydrogen there make it worse. So it's a fuel. Now, to compare that to the other fuels, hydrogen is much lighter than air, probably 14 times lighter than air, and around 57 times lighter than gasoline. So, and if it's in its gas form, if there's a leak, will dissipate very quickly upwards, and probably even if self-ignition happened, though we know that ignition requires a source for the ignition and the oxygen. Oxygen is available on air, in the air, and then will dissipate straight away. You probably hear that sound of explosion. Nothing will happen underneath. While if you have a petrol car, and caught fire, then the petrol will like make a spill and probably take the fire around the car itself and the surroundings. Now, this is a good introduction that shows it's safer than the fossil fuel type of fuels. But that comes with some challenges and some conditions. So we are talking that hydrogen going to dissipate upwards, of course, when it's not confined, nothing on the top. If it's in an underground garage, we have to think where this gas going to go. If it's liquefied, like liquid hydrogen, which any gas can be liquefied, then because it's so cold, as a liquid, going to behave like the petrol. And even the vapor, you can't ignite the liquid. You ignite the vapor of the liquid if you want to ignite it, or if there's a source of ignition. Because it's so cold, going to stay on the ground and probably behave similar to LPG. So we have to deal with it with a bit of care and some special engineering and controls required. Again, it's similar to any other type of fuel. Now, back to the point, why also we think it's a bit more dangerous or more dangerous than that? Because the range of possibility to ignite is much wider than all other fuels. So it's 4% till about 73%. And that's really wide range. And at the same time, the energy required to ignite hydrogen vapor, hydrogen gas, it's almost 1/10 of the energy required to ignite the fossil fuel, most of the fossil fuel, like the natural gas or the butane or the other type of gases. One more thing is it's odorless and colorless, and that's a big challenge. And because if there's a leak, you probably won't be able to sense that leak. And one more thing is when it burns almost invisible. You could pass and one radiate the heat similar way compared to other fossil fuels. So you could pass or be very close to the flame without realizing. Of course, engineering controls can be fit in those places, and like thermal cameras or some other detectors. There's even handheld detectors if there's any leak. One more thing, something important which was solved is hydrogen, because it's a very small molecule, can escape through the other materials. And we call this can cause cracks and then failure in most of the materials, even steel. So we call this hydrogen embrittlement. It's not very well known, how I should put it. Very well as a phenomena, not very well understood, but there's kind of a level of understanding. The good thing is we know that we now have a database for the suitable materials to be used with hydrogen. So I would say problem solved. And we are solving the other problems, like we are trying to add kind of that material to add some other,
another injection station,
something like that. And the rest of them, we are dealing with each one of them, and there's a lot of research and development and pilot projects, trials. However, some incidents happened in the last 1 or 2 decades. And even 5 years ago, one of the fueling stations in Norway exploded. And then luckily no one killed. But again, so the hydrogen, there was a failure in one of the connections. And because of that leak, and hydrogen can be ignited so easy, a source of ignition ignited the things. So once we deal with the hydrogen carefully, like all other fuels. Again, all other fuels, we know how to deal with them for a long time, and we used to use them. This one, kind of a new technology. Once we deal with it in a good way, and once we develop the right regulations, the right standards, then can be used safely in the cars, in our homes. In the industry, we have in Australia a very good record. Almost no big incident regarding hydrogen, though we use it a lot in our refineries and making ammonia in 4 or 5 different places around Australia, and manufacturing also like fertilizers and the rest of it, and no incidents actually. Very good record and safety. However, when you deal with industry, it's far away from residential areas, from general public, from children. So we start thinking about the safest way to store hydrogen and to control the release of the hydrogen. And that's why what we call it the hydrogen sponges. So our materials can absorb or adsorb or chemically combine with hydrogen. To store hydrogen in those materials, we call it material-based technologies. And one of them is the metal hydrides. So when you store hydrogen in a metal hydrides, which is kind of a powder or a paste, and you don't need to put a lot of pressure, so very low pressure. And to release the hydrogen, you have to heat that cylinder or that vessel over 100 degrees, 120 degrees, 150, some of them 300 degrees. So it's safe and won't release hydrogen even if you open the cover. And that one of the systems manufactured here in Australia by Level in New South Wales, they use that type of technology, metal hydrides, and that's why it's safe. I should say safer than high pressure type of vessels, because with the high pressure, if there's a leak, and if it's high pressure, then supersonic jet of the leak can ignite self-ignition for the hydrogen. And that's a big challenge. That's why we start thinking to use those materials to reduce those safety concerns. And it's promising. Some of the metal hydrides can store in as a volume, say 1 cubic meter, can store more than double the amount of hydrogen when it's liquefied as a liquid hydrogen in its pure form. So 1 cubic meter of liquid hydrogen contains 71 kilograms of hydrogen. And some metal hydrides can go up to 150 kilograms of hydrogen. And why we are not using them a lot? They are still expensive. And that's why there's a lot of research and development and trials to find different materials and most efficient way to reduce the cost. The materials themselves as an asset, because we're going to use them so many times. The other way is, or the other approach is how we're going to get the hydrogen in and out, the control system. Most of the metal hydrides controlled by thermal type of management. However, some metal hydrides will release the hydrogen just by adding water. So many different types of those materials, and it's promising. And that's why what I see now, back to the question, in the next 5 years, the efficiencies of producing hydrogen from green resources or renewable energies will be more efficient, reduce the cost of the hydrogen equipment, like the electrolyzers, the rest of it, find a viable way and cost-effective way to store the hydrogen safely and transport the hydrogen also, and like safely and cost-effective. So, and reproducing power, or use it as a fuel, or use it to produce ammonia, green ammonia, or use it in the all other industries. Like now, there's a big topic, we call it green steel, to reduce a ton of iron ore to iron. We use usually about 800 kilograms of coal to deoxidize the ore. We can use about 55 kilograms of hydrogen
Do the same.
to do the same job and zero emissions.
Mm.
So that's why everyone is looking at different applications. Of course, safety is always a concern. But when it comes to industry, they've been using hydrogen for a very long time, and the safety record is there.
Mm.
Now, why it's not going into our houses? This kind of
Depends where you live, because some will argue that in South Australia it's going into some houses, but only at a blended rate. And I think the blend's up to about 13%, I think, at the moment. But still, that's one of the questions that often gets asked. Well, we once had hydrogen within our town gas because our town gas profile, a majority of the portion of it from a chemical componentry perspective was hydrogen. And then we went to LNG or a natural gas system. Why did we stop? When we had the infrastructure there, why did we stop having a hydrogen blend within our town gas supply?
Yeah, the answer is very straightforward, actually. Why they changed from town gas to natural gas? Because natural gas was cheaper. And once it comes cheaper, and there was I would say, not that big concern about the environment in the 70s. So was a more viable, cost-effective solution is to convert to natural gas, though there's few towns around the world still using town gas. And probably town gas is the first time being used in London in 1870, 80, something like that, to light up the lights in the streets, first of all. And we use some of it here in Australia. Almost most of the cities were using it until the 70s, when the natural gas was available, and a lot of it in Australia, and become cheaper. Now we are trying to go back to that old days, but in a different way.
Yeah.
So we're going to produce the hydrogen from renewable. Before, the town gas was produced from coal gasification. So was that type of not very clean, not clean at all, type of hydrogen. Now we are trying to inject clean hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, green hydrogen, to reduce the emissions associated with using the natural gas. We are almost most of the scientists agree that up to 20% blend, you don't need to modify anything. But after that, you have to look at the suitability of the network, the pipelines, and also the user appliances. You need probably to change and modify some of those injectors and some of those nozzles and metering and the rest of it. Luckily, we have a lot of good pipelines or network which is used for natural gas here in Australia, but it's suitable for 100% hydrogen.
Yes.
So that's why some of the gas providers, gas companies, they are looking at this technology because they know at one stage they can't continue their business model depending on natural gas and fossil fuel. So they know that, and they are now leading the way to find out those alternatives to reduce the gas emissions. Back to the sub-question that why we don't see it in our houses, stored in our houses to store renewable energy as electricity and the rest of it. First of all, there's big lack of regulations. Regulations depends on the standards, and there's lack of standards when it comes to hydrogen because there's lack of trials. It's kind of a loop, but the world is working to develop enough standards, and then after that we are expecting to develop the right set of regulations that we can. For example, one of those systems, we received it 4 years ago here in WA, and still sitting at the backyard, we couldn't install it in a household because there's not enough regulations to support that. So we're going to try it in kind of an empty house or something like that for a while until we develop the regulations. So trials and pilot projects very important. Now, why it's not spreading out a lot to use it as a fuel in the cars, or even that's not just the regulations, that's lack of infrastructure. So if you don't have a lot of hydrogen fueling stations, you're not going to buy the car. I wanted to buy one of those cars, but we have one fueling station in WA. And every time just to go there and fill your car, that's kind of a challenge. And the problem is we had a good project proposal to install let us say five fueling stations on one of our national routes here, about 1,600 Ks. 5 of them will be good enough to start converting the heavy haulage trucks to work on hydrogen. And the trucks said, owners and companies, they said, yeah, put the hydrogen filling stations and cheap enough, and we're going to import the hydrogen trucks. The fueling stations investors, they said, if there's no hydrogen trucks, why we put so it's kind of a chicken and egg, man. Who's going to start first? So that's when the government plays the role and start in parallel with some incentives and developing the right regulations, like those protocols and how to deal with hydrogen in a house, in a household, in a suburb, and blah, blah.
So most of our listeners would know that I once was a technical regulator. So that's how my journey in this space started. When we talk about regulations, and particularly in Australia at the moment, and particularly around hydrogen, yeah, there are some topics that the regulators are still trying to work out, and they're still trying to get consensus on it. One of the things that's misinterpreted within the industry broadly is we live in a performance-based framework. We don't live in a prescriptive-based framework. So what that means is if the standards won't tell you exactly what to do, we'll say this is what we want. This is kind of the safety parameters of what we want to see. But you are always allowed to provide first principle approaches. And that's what I think needs to occur within the hydrogen space, particularly because there will be new technologies available that will fall outside the criteria of what a standard applies to it. And I think there's a big opportunity within the market for people to educate themselves around knowing the safety application, understanding the intention of the regulations of the acts of the standards. And then, for example, and I think we can talk off air once this is finished about that particular pilot project that you'd like, that would be a perfect safety case that you would, instead of waiting for the regulator to create a new set of standards, because from a background perspective, when we talk about that, the issue that we have within Australia is the committees are so small, or they're working on other standards and standard development. And because you've got this uptake globally of hydrogen as a fuel, an energy source, a transportation requirement, and then you've got all of the subcategories of that. And committees aren't agile enough to be able to start adopting things that are coming out of, say, international committee members like ISO, IEC, that body of committees that are more across it, that have better funding capabilities, that have access to a greater level of resource from technological horsepower. So when you have pilot programs, well, we recommend with Zero Industries is you build the safety case, and instead of going to your regulator and going, please, Mr. Regulator, can I do this? You sit down with them and you go, this is our case. This is what we're doing. Here's where we can align. Here's a portion that we can align with current standards, current regulations. Here's where we have to deviate because of these particular parameters. This is what we've done. We see this as an equivalent level of safety to the standards. And that's the journey that you take them on as well, because the resourcing of the regulatory space is very limited. And you've got, this is going to sound bad, but some, I'm not going to say all, some their practical knowledge is not in line with, say, your practical knowledge or your technical expertise. And so they're there administering an act and administering standards and legislation and doing all of that administrative work that is cumbersome to ensure that everyone's doing the right thing. But then if you can bring the case to them and say, listen, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it, this is how it's going to roll out, we'd like to have you involved as a stakeholder. And we know that your legislation isn't, but we're going to create this as a pilot program and share with you learnings. They would be welcoming and open to that discussion. They always are.
Absolutely. You are right here. And for example, we have many projects and tens of projects in Australia regarding hydrogen. And I was involved with a few of them, designing the system from scratch. And we just got through. So implemented and commissioned through what we have as regulations, as a set of standards, and identifying what we need more, the gaps there. So probably the issue is we can get through when it comes to industry, because we've been dealing with hydrogen for a long time. The issue is very sensitive when it comes to a household where kids can play around. And general public. So it's a bit more sensitive. And here you cannot go, when I said we couldn't install it yet because of that lack of regulations, doesn't mean that we are unable or we don't have enough set of standards and regulations to build the pilot projects. No, that's not the case. We built a lot. And if you go to search the hydrogen knowledge sharing platform, there's over 120 hydrogen projects in Australia, industrial, and about 300 research and development and pilot projects in Australia regarding hydrogen. So all these projects, they got through the regulations and standards, and they let them go to start understanding and identify the gaps. And lessons learned could be the start point or restart point to develop the right regulations. Eventually, in a few years' time, not very long time, we'll have enough set for regulations and mature technologies, safe technologies to be used in a household. So that's my expectation, even hope.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think it's a case is that as the industry matures and we see I feel bad for hydrogen in a sense that it has a lot of potential, but because of the scrutiny that it's under, any incident that happens is, let's throw it away. Let's not worry about it. Let's not explore that because, this one instance that happened in Norway, and we're not looking at it from a probability or a percentage perspective. We're going, that one incident meant hydrogen equals bad. Let's stop. When the reality is the incidents that have occurred have not been because of, yes, the hydrogen has been the fuel that propagates the explosion, and there are characteristics of that case. It's just a series of events that went wrong. Let's look at those series of events and go, what are we going to do as an engineering community, as a scientific community? What can we do to mitigate this from happening again? How do we have the correct monitoring of it? Where are we going to place those monitors? How are they going to detect? Who are they going to call? What happens if put logic around the conditioning of it as well? So I'm with you on that. I think as we see more projects get out of feasibility into feed and then go through construction and commissioning and into operations, I think if we can all look at the lessons learnt through it, I think we're going to be much better off as a community around what hydrogen presents within the, renewable, within the green energy space, within decarbonisation, however you want to cut it.
How much time we have? Can we? Because I wanted to mention.
Let's just keep going.
So, for example, in 2024, we had about 26,000 hydrogen cars on the roads, and over 5,000 buses, hydrogen buses, running around the world. 7,500 trucks, and some of them even manufactured in Australia and still running around Melbourne, and 14 hydrogen trains. And the last one was opened or commissioned in November in China by the energy minister, the Chinese energy minister. So it's growing up and it's coming, though we still have those concerns, and most of the concerns, it's coming from the investors. And the investors, they want to make profit.
Oh,
and if we go to the grey hydrogen, it's been going for a very long time, and a very big market actually, and cheap enough, cost effective. So it's going on. When it comes to use green hydrogen, which is probably 4 or 5 times more expensive than the grey hydrogen. The investors here, they will find an excuse, and I can't blame them. They want to make a profit. That's when the government play that role. And we have a very good program here, the Head Start program, when the Australian government put $2 billion to support the gap between the traditional grey or brown type of hydrogen and the renewable hydrogen, the green hydrogen. So we know that there's a gap. So we should not expect the investors the companies want to make profit, to come and put money there if it's more expensive. Obviously, it's more expensive. Even green ammonia, it's about 3 times more expensive than the grey ammonia. But we are doing a lot. Like we have here in WA, in Australia, a few companies, and they start producing 5% or 10% of their ammonia production as green ammonia. Though it's still expensive, these pilot projects will expand. Then at one stage, remember that we had what we call it carbon tax. And this carbon tax can change the whole situation, and it's coming. Once the carbon tax will be introduced again, then automatically, as a result, the green hydrogen will be cost effective. Then everything will start taking off. So that's the first thing. The question was not asked, and I wanted to mention it here in our discussion, is the use of water, because green hydrogen, we're going to use water. And there is a shortage of fresh water around the world. And probably
Yes.
the next wars they expect going to be around or about water. So I'd like to explain that green hydrogen, mainly we use renewable energy, and probably the main technology is to use electrolyzers to
Yes.
split the water to oxygen and hydrogen. Now, first of all, we are not adding to the problem a lot. Why is that? Simply, whatever water we're going to split, once we use the hydrogen, that water will come back to the atmosphere. Definitely. We don't need to use fresh water always, because we need it to be purified and deionized so we can desalinate some of the seawater or from aquifers. A good study was published 2 years ago from the Arena and some other think tanks around the world. Not our IRENA, the International Energy Agency. And that showed that what we use for agriculture as water, probably agriculture we can't avoid it, but what we use for industries, it's about over 100 times now, 100 times or 150 times more water than what we're going to need 2050 to reach zero emissions. So you can imagine, it's a very tiny, small, and probably less than 1 in 1,000 of what we use for agriculture at the moment. That's in 2050, when we're going to produce a lot of hydrogen and split a lot of water. So if we are adding to the problem, we're going to add a very tiny, small portion. And desalination is really viable. So each kilogram of hydrogen around at a lower heating value, it's 33.3 kilowatt hour of energy. And to desalinate a cubic meter, it's between 2 to 4 kilowatt hour energy. So that's enough to produce 100 kilogram of hydrogen. So 3.3 megawatt hour of energy compared to 4 kilowatt hour. So it's not a very big portion again. And we can use renewable energy only to desalinate, so reduce the emissions for the feedstock, because the water is the feedstock here.
Yes.
And so there's no big issue. To give you an idea, the average water consumption here in WA, it's around 300 liters of water per person per day. And 1 kilogram of hydrogen, which is 9 liters of water, enough energy to supply the whole household for 24 hours. Because it's around 33 kilowatt hour, and with the efficiencies of regenerating, probably you get 20 kilowatt hours. That's the average electricity consumption in our households here in Stewart. That's 10 liters. And the consumption is around 300 liters per person per day. 2 or 3 people in a household.
So you're only really adding another 3 liters onto that for the running of the household, or what that individual would contribute to as far as their power consumption if that water was used for desal purposes. So the figures add up for it to be viable. That's what I'm hearing.
Yep. So it's not a big issue. So we don't have to worry that much about using the water, because we're going to need really one company from New South Wales, they said one bottle of 600 milliliters of water can take you on a hydrogen bike from Sydney to Canberra.
Wow.
The kilometers. That's how you compare the things. So we should educate the people, because some of them, they said, you're going to use our water and we are already suffering from. So education is very important. The think tank groups and researchers, they should advocate increase the awareness, like around the community, the general public, then governments, regulators, and then the investors. So once the investors see the like the future of this technology, they will start this. And investors very important. You can't just keep going on providing the incentives and the money from the government as taxpayers' money. You need to make it viable and attract more investments, private companies, even public companies, semi-governmental companies, to invest more in this infrastructures, and then we see the things start changing, and it's kind of a chain reaction. So yeah.
So on saying that, as we wrap up, how can an individual, who should an individual reach out to if they want to get more involved in understanding more about hydrogen, understanding how they can maybe educate themselves on renewable technology or what they can do as an individual? Is there any resource? Is there any community group? Is there anything that you would be able to point someone towards with that?
So there is a lot and of different types of entities and ways to get the information. But here in WA or in Australia, we have the like research centers or the universities or the TAFEs. On the other hand, for industries, we have what we call it the Hydrogen Council, Australian Hydrogen Council. That's for the industries and the companies. And in between those research, we have also what we call it Australian Hydrogen Research Network.
Yes.
So researchers and those thinkers on a side. The other side is the industry, which is the Australian Hydrogen Council. There's some entities in between. One of them is the Hydrogen Society of Australia. It's not for a profit organization, and they do a lot of community awareness. I know how they do it because I was the WA chapter, the chair of WA chapter, and now I'm the technical advisory committee member of this committee. So they've been around Australia educating the general public and sometimes connecting the industry with the universities and invite general public. Also, like for example, we celebrated Hydrogen Days. Hydrogen Day is 8th of October, and that's related to the atomic weight of hydrogen, 1.008. So on those days, we had, like, even the last one was the sixth times in a row. We had a lot of researchers, professors, and governments, member of parliaments, and investors, and general public, even kids, they were there. And we had an exhibition which they can see some of those hydrogen equipment in action, increase the education and the awareness in the public, like the general public. It's very important, and that's what we call it community license. If we get that license, then government will be more involved, investors will be more involved, universities and research centers will be more involved. That synergy between all these stakeholders, it's very important. And I think the Hydrogen Society of Australia is doing a good job in connecting all these different stakeholders. And that's one of the resources. The other one is doing some research or search and we have here in Australia what we call it Hydrogen Knowledge Sharing Platform. There's a very good resource, and you can get an idea about what's going on. Some ideas like what we discussed here about hydrogen itself. And there's even a high standard kind of a portal there, so you see all the standards, all the regulations. You see different types of equipment, what sort of companies working there. So very good. And it's been developed by, I was part of the team, developed by CSIRO. So it's very good source of information. We called the portals high resource, high research, high standard, and high education.
I'll put all those links down in the show notes as well, so people have access to them. And where can people find you? Like, if you want to be found.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm the Technical Advisory Committee for the Hydrogen Society of Australia. So just communicate with the Hydrogen Society of Australia. I have also a small company doing hydrogen models. So hydrogen in action, a small car like this big, but work on actual hydrogen, a small fueling station, a small fuel cell, very safe. For education, I use it for increase the community awareness and for education. And I teach hydrogen systems at the universities. So my company is, I call it Hydrogen Economy Group. So H2E, h2e.com.au. And you'll find a lot of information and shoot an email if you have a question.
Excellent. Well, I'll also put that in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for taking the time as well. I know that we've been back and forth for a couple of months to get this organised, and we were able to. So I appreciate that flexibility and appreciate you sharing with the audience your knowledge and your aspirations and your vision for what hydrogen will mean, not only within Australia, but also in the globe. So thank you very much for being an ambassador for that.
Thank you very much, Travis. Excellent opportunity. Thank you very much again. And I hope we'll do it again.
We will.
About something specific. The next one will be probably on synthetic fuel.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. That would be a very interesting topic because that has a lot of potential impact and a lot of potential for scope, I think, within Australia too. So excellent. All right. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. See you next time.